As a little boy growing up on a farm in western Pennsylvania, I would often look at the stars at night, looking up, wondering what was really up there, wondering if I could, with a sharp enough telescope, see where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin had walked on the moon. Had one of the teachers tell me I really wouldn't amount to anything more than a farmer. A guidance counselor telling me to not bother taking college prep classes or the SAT tests, all those things that you kind of need if you want to go to college, but you need a college degree to start working for NASA. So I had a lot of self-doubt. Somebody figuratively took me by the hand and said, let's take a night class in electronics. And I said, nah, I'm not smart enough. And he said he would join with me. And we both took the night class. I got an A, and I'm thinking, man, maybe the teachers were wrong in high school. Ended up graduating with 2 degrees, magna cum laude, but that didn't mean I could get into NASA. It was about 12 years after my degree when I finally was able to get into NASA at the Johnson Space Center.
Hey, let's welcome Geoffrey Yoder, former acting associate administrator of NASA's Science Mission Directorate and a longtime senior leader within the agency. Welcome to the show, sir, and good to see you.
Thank you, and it's my honor and my pleasure actually to share some of my experiences. Hopefully, it'll help others watch and listen to this.
Sure. So let's start with your background and your story. What led you to join NASA? How did you do it? And maybe if you want to expand on your background, we can start from there.
Sure. Well, let me start off with as a little boy growing up on a farm in western Pennsylvania, I would often look at the stars at night, looking up, wondering what was really up there, wondering if I could, with a sharp enough telescope, see where Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin had walked on the moon, things like that. Curiosity, but that got tempered a lot once I got into high school. Had one of the teachers tell me I really wouldn't amount to anything more than a farmer. A guidance counselor telling me to not bother, taking college prep classes or the SAT tests. All those things that you kind of need if you want to go to college, but you need a college degree to start working for NASA. So I had a lot of self-doubt, things like that growing up. And it was a few folks that saw that I had, I guess, potential and helped me along the way, as well as some really hard lessons that I had to learn up front. Ended up getting into college then, but getting into college without any college prep classes, low high school scores, and no SAT meant that it was going to be a challenge. But I ended up getting into college pretty much under academic probation for the first year to make sure that I was actually going to not repeat what I did in high school. And then fast forward into college, ended up graduating with 2 degrees, magna cum laude, but that didn't mean I could get into NASA. And so there was still a lot of learning experiences that I needed to develop before I was ready for NASA. And it was about 12 years after my degree when I finally was able to get into NASA at the Johnson Space Center. But I learned a boatload of lessons before going into NASA. A couple of the core things, though, within NASA, as I kept advancing. I started off at the Johnson Space Center. Had developed was asked to start up a new branch called the Flight Hardware Development Branch. And this was working with astronauts and others to send hardware to space, largely human spaceflight activities. But I never forgot some of the things that I learned growing up, on the farm, things like integrity. I remembered the self-doubt that I had, and then seeing some of those in some of the NASA folks, maybe lack of confidence. And that helped form how I was going to manage to not just discredit folks, but to try to help encourage them along the way, just like somebody had done for me when I was struggling out of high school. Somebody figuratively took me by the hand and said, let's take a night class in electronics. And I said, nah, I'm not smart enough. And he said he would join with me. And we both took the night class. I got an A, and I'm thinking, man, maybe the teachers were wrong in high school. So doing the same thing as a NASA manager, when I would see people that I thought really had good potential, rather than discarding them, saying, well, you can't do your job, my goal was to try to help them along the way. And so throughout that, I was advancing into leading the agency's independent assessments after I transferred to NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., but the same type of thing. And then I was the astrophysics division deputy director and acting director, the James Webb program director for a while, and ultimately led to being the acting associate administrator for the Science Mission Directorate. But there were several management philosophies that I held along the way. One was, if I needed to do your job, why do I need you? But that's a little more complex than it sounds. If I'm constantly having to do somebody's job that works for me, it's one of two things. I've micromanaged them to death where they feel like they can't do their job, or I probably put them in the wrong position. And so working through that to see, was it somebody that was just having self-doubt that needed help? Was I micromanaging and not allowing them to do their job? Or was it just a wrong fit? And so I was constantly thinking of those things. Why did somebody feel like they couldn't do their job? And sometimes it's just some people's nature that they just didn't feel comfortable making a decision. One of the tragedies that was a result from that was when I was at JSC, we ended up hiring somebody to help my chief engineer, who several years later, I mean, he just could not make a decision, always needed more data, and more data. And he ended up, this was a murder in 2007, I believe, at the Johnson Space Center, where he couldn't make a decision. He felt like he was going to be fired for it and ended up, you know, actually killing my chief engineer as well as then killing himself in my old office suite. And those things, I never forget either that, you never know what people are going through. The other philosophy I had from the management was, I'm not smart, you're not smart. Collectively, we're brilliant, meaning I'm going to have an open door office policy. When you come into my office, don't come in with just, oh, I think I ought to do something. Think about it first. But then we're going to hash things out and we're going to argue, we'll debate, but in a non-threatening sense, such that I'm a believer that collectively we come out with the best answer. So in my management approach, I always do that also. And that if somebody comes into me, I don't want them to feel like they have to hold back or tell me what they think I want to know. I want to know what the best answer is. And that has served me quite well in my leadership roles. I remember there was one case where another division had asked me to take on somebody because they felt like that person was maybe not producing in their organization, maybe causing trouble. I'm not exactly sure why. So I started looking for the strengths of this person, not the weaknesses. And when I focused this person's job on this person's strength versus a weakness, it became a star performer. And it's helping people lead them, but then get out of the way and support them so they can really achieve things. I remember a young engineer, well, he'd just gotten his PhD, it was working for me, working some international activities. And, he was young and we worked together, and then I stepped back. Of course, I watched to make sure things weren't going south, but left him go off to do what he needed to do. And I mean, he just did a fantastic job. And when you put the trust in somebody, they're going to put that trust back in you, and want to make sure that they don't let you down. So those are just some of the core management philosophies. From a little kid that totally wouldn't amount to anything to leading the science mission directorate, caused me to actually write a book about my experiences. I believe strongly in we need to give back to the community, especially people that had the positions that I did. So I would go into schools, talk about my experiences, talk about how if you go into space, it's work in space. It's not that you have to be an astronaut or a scientist. We need people that understand air conditioners, as an example. Our spacecraft on top of a rocket can get pretty hot if we don't treat that right. We need people, tech writers. And so when I talk to the schools, it's amazing the response of some of the students, like, oh, I can do this. Oh, yeah, I want to be part of this. But I had teachers tell me I should write a book about my experiences, and some parents, so that wouldn't just be from the discussions at the schools. So after some time, I ended up writing the book Under the Midnight Sky, which shares some of the trauma, some of the experiences. One thing I will say that was interesting, and I always bring this up to the students, is as an author, I got a D- in seventh grade English class. And so it was a teacher that was actually picking on me for the way I spelled my name. And that set a bad tone. But it's to provide encouragement, really, for students and others, actually anybody that has self-doubt, lacks the courage to pursue and go forward. So that's kind of in a nutshell, some of the core things that were important to me, from a management standpoint. Um, for me, people are the biggest resources. And if you treat your folks that work for you right, they're going to do everything they can for the mission and help you succeed. And the worst thing I could do as a leader was micromanage. Micromanage just kills the spirit. So that's sort of as a nutshell. I'm sure I've left things out that have you asking questions of what happened.
Yeah, no, that's an incredible story from, growing up on the farm to joining NASA, not just joining NASA, but being one of the leaders within the agency. So, what was the transformation like for you? Because as you said, people, even your teachers, didn't really believe in you early on, and you had to go through this process, go to the college and then get the degrees and ultimately learn all of these skills. So was it perseverance that drove you along the way, or maybe it were you had some mentors who helped you, uh, you know, overcome all of those roadblocks? Or how did you transform from a kid who didn't really know whether he could do it to a leader within one of America's greatest agencies?
Yeah, no, that's good. The biggest single thing for me, and then there were a lot of other steps. So right after high school, I was married at the age of 20 because I wasn't going to college. Ended up being a sheet metalist and a welder. And that's where my coworker, as we started talking about electronics stuff, is the one who said, "Look, if you take the night class, I'll go with you." Turns out he could have taught the class, but he, pulled me along the way. That was probably the single biggest transfer, transforming the time period. Now there were still a lot of things, that happened after that. So it started giving me confidence that maybe I shouldn't listen to what other people think about me as much as start driving the force. And so it took one success after another to start building the confidence. One manager, one boss believing in me to say, "Hey, I want to put you in this position that I never thought I could achieve." So I was like an engineering program manager for some major systems for the DoD, as a contractor. I'm thinking, whoa, they have faith in me to do that. So it was the first person saying, "I'll take you by the hand to show you," to give me some confidence, and then others that would lead me along the way. One of the things that was interesting is, as I mentioned, a little kid looking up at the stars at night, wondering if I could see where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin worked. One of my jobs when I got to NASA at NASA headquarters was to lead a team to see what we would do when we had humans back on the moon, but for a sustained period of time. And I remember we had just briefed some of our results or thoughts to the public. And I remember one evening sitting in my office and my phone rang, and it was Buzz Aldrin. We talked for like an hour and a half to talk about what our study said, what his experiences were. So I had quite the small, looking up at the stars dream, to then talking to somebody. I wondered if I could see him walking on the moon, or, where he walked on the moon. So it's experiences like that, when you position yourself right, just starts building up I want more than just the confidence, but there are times when, you just felt like you're just beat down. And to think about, I can get through this. I've gotten through this many times. I'll make it through this challenge also. Um, working with international folks was tremendous. Being able to when you're down or when you really feel like you're embarrassing, how to turn that into positive. I'll give you one example that's kind of funny, but I was flying to Europe to meet with our counterparts at ESA, European Space Agency. And I talked with my counterpart on the phone. This was the first visit. And it was going to be, I don't want to say a tense meeting, but it could have turned out that way. And the night before, we decided to go out for dinner, go over to a restaurant, had a nice white tablecloths and things like that. I reached across the table to get a loaf of bread or a piece of bread, and I spilled a glass of red wine all over the table, all over my shirt, and all that stuff. And I kind of looked at him and said, "Yeah, I have different ways of breaking the ice." So I could have just fell down or just said, "Nah, I'm going to make the best out of it." And that's kind of the approach I take in life also, is even when you're down, you make the best out of it. You can always get through it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I appreciate you sharing this. And let's say we have young people listening to this podcast and they dream of joining NASA and being part of the space exploration progress and then different missions that we'll have in the future. What advice could you give to those people, young people who would like to join NASA, but they don't know where to start and how to even do that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of key things. Within NASA, as I said earlier, there are multiple roles, whether you want to be a thermal engineer or mechanical engineer scientist. But it all hinges back to start building that foundation. I didn't have the college prep classes going into college, which meant my freshman year in college was kind of tough. I didn't have the take the SATs, which, when you're going into college, they want your SATs. For me, I was out of college 5 years, so it didn't matter anymore. But start reading, learning, understanding, and at a young age, don't focus on, I want to be an astronaut or I want to be a thermal engineer. Focus on the sky, is really not the limit. It's beyond that. And start exploring some of the avenues. You may want to be, a software engineer, a robotics engineer, things like that. But start with the foundation, get to understand math, focus on your writing skills, things like that to have the core, and then observe and start looking around because you'll find your niche. For me, I wanted to work human space flight. So that's why I focused on the Johnson Space Center. Well, I ended up at headquarters working the science because that became really exciting to me. Seeing the science, it involves human spaceflight, involves all those areas, but that then became my passion. So I think for a young person coming in, don't assume the passion you have at that point is your final passion. Keep your mind open. Explore, really explore, and look at challenges. Don't let them stop you. Look at them to see how can I persevere through it.
Yeah, and it's true. Like looking back at myself, this idea of evolving passions is certainly true, and I'm pretty sure it applies to all of us. Are there any misconceptions about NASA that you hear maybe from younger people, or maybe from people in general, that you want to challenge? Maybe something about its technology or something about agency itself?
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed working for NASA. So much so that I turned down other job offers that would have probably paid twice as much as I was making because it became the passion to work there. There are others who step back and say, okay, I want to be like a contractor for NASA. And that's okay too. They didn't want some of the perceived bureaucracy, and there is some in there. You know, there's there's no doubt. I was one that if I was always looking at how do we streamline a process? What are the things that are in the way that really don't help advance the agency? But there are those things in there, and there is that misconception and somewhat validated that there's some bureaucratic steps that don't allow you to go forward. What's interesting to me is when I hear those challenges is if there's an accident, whether it's a satellite going south and it's a NASA one, we get pinged pretty hard. You get a lot of congressional oversight, stuff like that. Where on the commercial side, it's maybe not as much the oversight. I have worked with so many tremendous engineers, scientists, engineers, program managers at NASA that were NASA civil servants as well as NASA contractors, that even if you can't get in, get the NASA badge, working as a contractor is equally rewarding, I think. We've had people who, friends who left NASA to go work for a contractor they felt like they maybe had more freedom. So you have to want to work for NASA, to really say, okay, I can endure all those things. I can even help make the systems better. Other misconceptions on NASA, between NASA and the NASA contractors, there's over 2,000 technologies that we had to develop for space that are now used in the commercial entity. And so, for me, even taking those technologies and then taking them into other areas is meaningful in itself. So I think it's a combination of, a NASA civil servant as well as the NASA contractors that makes the team. It's not just you're a civil servant, therefore you're X, or you're a contractor, therefore you're Y. But it takes both to be the team.
And it seems for young people today, it might be in some ways more exciting to join companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin because, as you mentioned, they don't have this government oversight. They might be faster. They have ambitious goals, and in the media, it's more advertised. So, what's your perspective on those private companies? If you were a teenager today in 2025, would you see yourself joining SpaceX or Blue Origin or still sticking to NASA?
So one of the things that I think is important is anybody working at NASA should also have experience working in the contractor side to help understand. Each has their own challenges. And without seeing the challenges of each other, you can make bad assumptions. So I encourage anybody. Half my career was in the private sector prior to joining NASA. It helped me understand some of the struggles that contractors had. What I liked with NASA, and I think any person coming into the industry needs to understand at NASA, I felt like I was charting the course. The contractors were then implementing the course. I wanted to be in the front of the spear. There are others who say, no, that's too, that's too scary and want to be the implementers. So, if you really want to be the implementer, not the spear, by all means, whether it's SpaceX, Blue Origin, they're doing fantastic things. And when I say, the front of the spear, I could say, well, we want to go to Mars for something. You now look what SpaceX is doing, or going to the moon, what Blue Origins is doing, and some of the others, they're actually implementing some of the stuff. It's not NASA saying, here, design it this way and this way and this way, which is what we used to do at NASA. So now it's more transforming. We want to go there. Here are some of the ground rules that we want to keep us safe, but you have more flexibility to do the how. And so I think whether you want to work for a NASA that's the spear driving it, or the implementers, either can be equally fulfilling.
And if you were to speculate and look into the future, what do you think the future of space exploration holds for us? Are we going back to the moon? Are we gonna establish a colony on Mars? Or do you think these things are further away from us than people want them to be?
Space is difficult. We make it look simple, but it's hard. It's unforgiving. I personally think, humans on Mars is further off than probably what we say. If you think about going back to the moon, we were going to be back there a decade ago, and that's even more difficult. And some of that is the technical challenges. Others are the political will, meaning is the funding really there? So I think it is pushed back some. Do I think we'll ever get there? Yeah, I do, because I think humans by nature have this passion for exploration. What is there? And I think this is where the SpaceXs or the commercial, whether it's SpaceX, Blue, and the others are really going to help us get along there, because the business of space is really how to get everybody engaged. So where it's not just a NASA thing anymore, where there's some production activity. So I think we need to get the business of space down a little bit further. Business meaning get other contractors engaged, other reasons for going, say, in low Earth orbit. Maybe it's the replacement for the space station, while some of the harder stuff's being looked at on how to get to Mars or wherever we want to go. But I think it's kind of a two-step. Get this business of space portion working, so whatever we do in the longer run is more sustainable.
And before we end the episode, do you have a final word you want to share with the listeners? Maybe something that we haven't had a chance to talk about, or maybe something that you want to say again, just for the listeners to remember that.
Yeah, I think if we just did two things. One, my experiences of a kid growing up, which caused me to write the book, Under the Midnight Sky. I would encourage people to take a look at that if they want a challenge or motivation. The second thing is, and has to deal with NASA. I've been there for 17 years. It's in my blood. So having been retired now for 9 years, I'm still passionate about NASA. NASA is a resilient organization, at least from my experience. And so while we see some of the political churn going on, I think NASA is going to come out strong. And my message is don't give up hope on NASA. It may shift, may evolve, but I think it's still a tremendous organization and will continue to be.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for joining the show and sharing all this. This is incredible advice, and the stories that you shared. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people listening to this are super motivated to consider their future at NASA or in space exploration space in general. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you have done for this cause. And thank you for joining today.
Sure. All right.